A very good afternoon to our esteemed dignitaries and participants. Welcome to the Kapuscinski Development Lecture, organized by the European Commission and the United Nations Development Programme, hosted by Symbiosis Center for European Studies, Symbiosis Center for International Education, Symbiosis International Deemed University. My name is Joanna Joshua, and I am the president of the Symbiosis Center for European Studies student think tank. I will also be moderating today's event. I would like to begin by quoting Ryszard Kapuscinski, who once said, "We cannot understand our problems if we do not think of them at a global planetary scale." It is ideals like these that led to the establishment of the Kapuscinski Development Lecture Series, named after Ryszard Kapuscinski, a Polish journalist and writer who focused on being the voice of the poor and covered clashes of culture, revolutions, and liberation struggles. These lectures are organized jointly by the European Commission and the United Nations Development Programme, and a network of partner institutions and think tanks. Since 2009, over 40,000 participants, live and online, have attended 130 lectures. The lecture series offers students an unprecedented opportunity to learn about and discuss development issues such as climate change, diversity and inclusion, economics, energy transition, sustainable development goals, among others. The high-level events contribute to the debate and formulation of European development policy. Today's talk is based on the wealth of people's stories. Development is about the validation of the wealth of stories that we have in our communities. Unfortunately, some of our stories have been deemed more valuable than others, and we have a long-lasting, deeply ingrained pattern of behavior that reinforce these created inequalities. To begin, I would like to call upon Dr. Vidya Yerardekar ma'am, Principal Director of Symbiosis Society and Pro-Chancellor of Symbiosis International Deemed University, to deliver the welcome address.
Dr. Aminata Khairu, Mr. Yan, you're sending out some mails, you can do that comfortably. Nidhi, the head of the Symbiosis Center for European Studies, and my dear wonderful, bright, dynamic faces that I see in front of me. I'm sorry, I've been running from one conference room to the other. There's again a very nice industry academia partnership or engagement session going on in the auditorium and the conference hall. And now we are here for another wonderful lecture, which is called the Kapuscinski Development Lecture, organized by the UNDP, the United Nations Development Programme. And I would have looked forward to listening to you, but I think I'll have to go back again after my little talk here. And Dr. Cairo is going to, I believe that she's going to talk to you about wonderful stories. And y'all are all Symbiosis students, that Symbiosis as an organization established by Dr. Muzumdar in 1971 actually came out of a story of a young Mauritian boy who suffered from jaundice, and there was nobody to take care of him. And his sister would come and give some home-cooked food through the window of the boys' hostel. And as a strict warden, Dr. Muzumdar went into the room to actually scold this boy because he thought there's some affair going on. And in the 70s, there were no girls loitering around boys' hostels or vice versa. And as a strict rector or a strict warden, he thought he will reprimand the student. And when he realized that, he's ill, he's weak, and the student started weeping, that's when Dr. Muzumdar thought that something needs to be done for international students, more specifically Afro-Asian students who came from different parts of the world to study in Pune city. And that's when he thought that Symbiosis as an organization should be set up, should be established for the welfare of foreign students who came here. And what he did was, it wasn't overnight that Symbiosis was started, because I was living in the same house as his daughter, and I still remember the conversations between my parents. And I remember having a lot of African students coming to our house, not just from Africa, but even other parts of the world, primarily Africa, Iran, and Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia. I remember those faces also. And Dr. Muzumdar would interview these foreign students, and when he would talk to them, he realized that they were discriminated in this land, in this city, just because they were black in color. And while students from Europe, from the US, were welcomed by Pune citizens, they were allowed to stay as paying guests or in their houses, or at that time in residential communities. African students were not allowed because they were black. I remember a student that my father was interacting with, a student from Ghana, who said that when I sit in the bus, even if a seat is vacant next to me, no one prefers sitting next to me because they discriminate. They feel they don't want to sit next to a black person. Another student who was studying in the Film and Television Institute of India, here an institute of repute, again a student from Uganda, who told my father that when he wakes up in the morning and goes to the toilet, at that time you didn't have attached toilets to rooms, there were common toilets. So if he would walk through the corridor, the Indian students would close their doors and windows because they didn't want to see a black face early morning. And these were very hard-hitting stories in this very city of Pune, where Pune citizens were discriminating amongst just or becoming color conscious. And what Dr. Muzumdar did was to actually interview these foreign students and publish their interviews in the local newspaper at that time, local regional newspaper called Kesri. So he would print the photograph of the student, the name of the student, the country that he came from, and the whole interaction that he had with this student in a form of a story, just so that he would sensitize the citizens of Pune city to not discriminate, to believe that the whole world is one family, as if there are brothers and sisters who come from faraway places. And for me personally, I remember my childhood has been staying with a student from Africa in our house, or a student from Ethiopia, or a student from Tanzania, or a student from Vietnam or Cambodia, just because they felt homesick, someone was not well, someone didn't understand English, couldn't speak well, so much so that my mother learned Persian, because there were a lot of students from Iran who could not speak English and faced a lot of problem. And today my mother can speak fluent Persian even today, and she interacts with Iranian students even today. So these are stories of symbiosis. So this whole university didn't really begin or was established to become a university, but it was established with a story of compassion, a compassion that came out of the mind or heart of a teacher, a warden of a hostel, who believed in the old Indian philosophy of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, believing that the whole world is one family. And I'm so glad that we are celebrating G20 on this very university campus. Again, the theme given by the Prime Minister is One Earth, One Family, One Future. Again, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. So I think for each one of you as students here, it's not just one lecture that you all are attending, but probably listening to a story that's going to change your lives. And I think when you live in Symbiosis, or you learn in any of our campuses of Symbiosis, again, it is your experience that you will learn a lot from, than just classroom lectures that would be taught to you by teachers, that will bring in the knowledge and the skills to be employed, but really to become a responsible citizen of this country or of the world. I think the experiences that you will have with students from different states who study with you, or students from different countries who will probably not study with you, but you come across on the campuses and who may be studying in different institutions. That is the way you will learn, through this wonderful experiential learning of having these people all across you, all around you, so that you learn these cultures, these regions, these languages, the food that they eat, so that will become, that will make you better people and better human beings than just the studies that we impart to you. For medical students, more specifically, I see some of them in aprons, and I've been a medical student like you. My medical education was very, very restricted to a very tunnel view of medicine and nothing beyond. I don't think I would have ever been capable of standing at a podium in front of an international gathering to speak even a few words, because communication wasn't taught, or we were never exposed to a culture beyond medicine. And I think medical college students are really lucky that they are one amongst so many others. So it's not just learning medicine, it's learning a lot of other things of life, which will bring in these qualities of empathy, sympathy, which is so required for each one of you when you treat patients. So whether you're a medical college student, or a telecom management, or a business school, or in engineering, I think the same thread that we weave amongst all of you is the thread of symbiosis, to believe that this beautiful world, whether it's of human beings, plants, animals, is one big family, and we need to respect them. We need to respect diversity. We need to include each one of them who may not be as competent as you, as well equipped as you, may be physically challenged, could be mentally challenged, but we all are like one family, and therefore we need to take care of each other and to be there by each other's side. So I think with this, I end my little talk and I welcome Dr. Cairo. I'm sure she's going to give a wonderful discourse. And remember that this may not be a part of your academic curriculum, but when you pass out of this university, maybe after several years, you will remember such talks. You will remember what's happening on the campus, because it's experiences that you actually remember than just didactic teaching that happens in classrooms. So wish you all the very best, and I hope you enjoy the lecture. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for taking us down memory lane in the form of stories that contributed towards the growth of Symbiosis and instilling the ideals of unity in diversity, non-discrimination, and the fact that the world is one family. I now request Dr. Vidya to felicitate our keynote speaker, Dr. Cairo. I now call upon Mr. Jan Cizinski, Manager of Kapuscinski Development Lectures Initiative, United Nations Development Program, to deliver the opening remarks.
So thank you, Aminata, for accepting the invitation and the university, such a wonderful university, located superbly on this hill, to prepare this event and organize. It's so great to be here. It's an initiative that started in 2009 with the European Commission, our partners, and UNDP and universities like this one here. But we have never been to India yet, so that's the first time. So we are thrilled and happy to be here, especially as a, I would say, kind of side event to the G20 summit. So that's sounds really serious, which means that whatever we speak actually and discuss the policies, we hope at least that it might translate into practice, into reality. As it was said, this initiative is named after the Polish writer and poet Ryszard Kapuscinski, who is covering developments a lot from different continents in the world. And he was as well, I mean, since he was a journalist, the stories were in the center for him, and the human stories actually. He focused very much on individuals with their aspirations, limits, ideas, dreams, skills, and so on. But of course, they all somehow at the end added up to large, sometimes revolutionary changes in the world, in different countries or continents. So I think that this lecture relates very well actually to what he was doing and focusing on specifically on human development and people. Yeah. So. I mean, we're really happy to be here together with our colleagues from the European Commission who are funding this initiative. I know we have, I guess we have the online on Zoom. We have the speaker from the European Commission, and yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for elucidating the importance of this prestigious lecture. We look forward to furthering the vision of this lecture series, and as in the past, we are certain that this lecture will be productive. I would now like to call upon Mr. Martin Seychelles, Deputy Director General for International Partnerships, European Commission, to deliver the opening remarks. Sir will be joining us virtually on Zoom.
Hello and good afternoon to you all, and thank you for this opportunity to say a few words at the start of this first Kapuscinski Development Lecture to be held in India. A theme of this lecture and the conference that will come over the next few days is inclusivity. And it is indeed in the spirit of inclusivity that we at the European Commission are broadening the family of universities that host these lectures. And we very much hope that this will indeed be the first and certainly not the last of such events in India. I don't need to persuade this audience about the importance of education in general and for the development of democratic societies and the role that universities in particular play in this. Access to education is a fundamental value that we support and is encapsulated in the Sustainable Development Goals, of which the fourth, education for all, we have increased our funding for this, with 13% of our budget contributing to this objective. Education and research form one of the pillars of the EU's Global Gateway Strategy, our values-based approach to supporting social and physical investment internationally with our partners. And we are committed to supporting this to quality education from the earliest ages through school and university to developing skills for work and for lifelong learning. An important pillar of that work is to provide opportunities for students and academics to experience studying and working in another part of the world. Erasmus Plus is the EU's very successful education flagship program, and it has been instrumental in ensuring that 1 million young people study in another country, not only from Europe, but also from our partner countries. Erasmus Plus is open to the entire world. It is a transformative experience in terms of what it teaches you about yourself and others. And I'm sure those who have gone through this process can attest with many stories and memories that teach us so much about how to be open to new experiences and other people's perspectives in a global world. And this is why I'm so pleased that India has had such great involvement with Erasmus+, with over 2,900 Indian students and staff coming to Europe under this program since 2014, and over 1,400 Europeans hosted in India in that time. Over 1,700 Indian researchers have also been funded through the EU Horizon 2020 Marie Skłodowska-Curie program. What Erasmus does is to help create a space so we can exchange and learn from each other. And I can say without doubt that it has been one of the most successful programs in the history of the European Union. I very much hope that through not only such programs such as this, but also events like this and others, and in the spirit of the endeavors of people like Richard Kapuscinski, we will continue to do this. I wish you all a stimulating and thought-provoking event.
Thank you, sir, for highlighting the importance of access to education and research. We are appreciative of the value-based approach used by the European Commission that has provided students across the globe with a stage to showcase their talents. I would now like to take this opportunity to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Aminata Cairo. From motivational keynotes to hands-on trainings, Dr. Cairo engages people, communities, and organizations to implement positive change and communicate the message that every story has value. Dr. Cairo will now shed some light on how we must hold space and start appreciating the richness and complexities of our stories.
Hey ya, hey yo, hey ya, hey yo, hey ya, way, hey ya, hey yo, hey ya, hey ya, hey yo, hey ya, hey, hey ya, hey yo, hey ya, hey yo, hey ya, way, hey ya, hey yo, hey ya. Hey ya, hey yo, hey ya, hey, hey ya, hey yo, hey ya, hey yo, hey ya, hey ya, hey yo, hey ya.
Ceremony. Human beings are social animals. We need contact and a sense of belonging. Even those of us who are loners We can do so within a context of community. Hence, we have used ceremony to affirm our membership in community and our appreciation of connectedness with our environment. There is evidence of ceremony being documented in cave paintings going back thousands of years. As we have moved into an information age where we can be informed through consulting our trusted phones and computers, many ceremonies have disappeared, but not all. Ceremonies serve the purpose to bond in community, to slow things down and take stock of where we are in relationship to each other. It gives us opportunity to connect with nature or our direct environment, which in turn affirms our humanity in a very fast-moving world. Ceremony is central to holding space. Ceremony, then, starts by being still and listening to what is necessary. When we are committed to holding space, we are committed to being of service. Therefore, we have to be ever alert on where people are. You have to tune in to where people are. There will be times where it is crucial to step in and facilitate some collective energetic shift. You do that through ceremony. You do that by grounding yourself, taking a deep breath, getting still, and trust, and taking a first step. For those of us with a spiritual practice, we call upon our ancestors or whatever forces we believe in when we take that first step. For those without a spiritual practice, the procedure is really the same. Key is that you step forward and trust. Trust in your abilities to contribute something. Trust that your presence can be meaningful. Trust that something will come. Ceremony is the ultimate non-intellectual gift you can use to be of service. It is not about thinking or knowing what to do. It is purely about sensing, feeling, and trusting, which will translate into doing. And the only way to learn how to develop this skill is to try and practice surrendering. Grantani, thank you for the gift of ceremony as a pathway for us as a community to get back to who we are.
Good morning. And first of all, thank you for being here with me. Thank you to the European National Development Program. Thank you for the European Commission. Thank you for Symbiosis for inviting me. Let me catch my breath for just a second. My name is Aminata, and I'm here with you today to look at this thing called stories. Right? What does that mean to us? And I'm going to share with you through the means of so I'm going to tell you lots of stories. And the idea is not just to listen to me, but to start connecting with your own stories. And through that, what does that mean for our collective story? I like this credo that you have, what we are one family. And so as a family, we are rich and we have all kinds of stories. Some good, some not so good. You know how family members are, right? But we are still part of that story. And so that's what we're going to do today. So I invite you to be open, to think. And the first thing I want to do, you are here not by accident, right? And so I want to start with honoring your parents and saying thank you to your parents and your family members that have contributed to you being here. Without them, you wouldn't be here. So we say thank you for your parents and for supporting you. Because as you are here, you're here for your family, but also your communities. You don't know who's watching. You don't know who's listening. You don't know who's bragging about you. Oh, my brother, my sister, you know where they are. You know, you have no idea the impact you are making just by being here. So we start with being grateful for that. And another thing I want to do, I'm going to give you some things to think about as I go through this lecture series. Okay, first slide, please. So the first word you see on there is a Dutch word. It's a little bit hard to pronounce. It is called gezellig. Now, don't choke when you try to say it. Let's try it. Gezellig. Let me hear you say it. Gezellig. All right. So gezellig means cozy, comfortable, right? And so Dutch people, thinks it better be gezellig. But when we start talking about inequalities, not so gezellig, right? So to keep in mind that if we're going to do this, if we're going to look at the complexities of our stories, sometimes it's not going to be gezellig. And so the challenge is, don't back away because it's not comfortable, but to say, no, I got this, right? Let's know up front that if we're going to look at some of these stories, it might not be gezellig, but we're going to do it anyway. That's what we have to do, right? So keep that in mind. Like, it might feel a little uncomfortable, that's all right. Second thing I want you to think about is the blues. You heard a little bit of blues music, and I like the blues because the blues is about, something is hurting, right? That's the ultimate when it's not gezellig. That's what the blues is about. So the blues is about lament. The dog bit me, my wife left me, and the car won't start. That's the blues, right? And so in the blues, what they say, bring your pain, bring your suffering, bring it, and be brutally honest about it. But the thing about the blues is, it's not just about the suffering, it's about, I have to go through the hard times in order to end up in the good times. Right? So it's not just about the pain, but it's like you have to go through it and you have to be honest about it. So I suppose like, it's not comfortable and I'm here. We say, no, bring it. Bring it. That's what the blues is about. And another thing about the blues, and that you also find in jazz, there comes a moment, they call it your moment to shine, right? When the spotlight is on you and you have to deliver. And it's not about, do you have all the answers? Do I know everything? No, I don't know, but I'm here, right? And you take that first step, trusting in everything that you're connected to, that something will come, right? Something will come. So take that first step. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I'm going to do it anyway. So that's what the blues is about. So I want you to keep that in mind. And the last thing I want you to keep in mind is a movement is called Holy Hip Hop. In the late 1990s, early 2000s, in California, you had this hip hop movement that came out of religion. Christianity, Islam, Rastafarianism. And so rather than the traditional rap, which was about how hard stuff was, they were rapping about you can be reborn. There's always the opportunity for a new story, right? There's always the opportunity for a new story. And so, of course, when you listen to the music, it was like, this is gangster rap, and people didn't want them. So they would go to church, people like, no, you can't do that stuff in here, right? And then they would go to the rappers, and you talking about what? No, you can't do that stuff here. So here are people who had a story to share, but it didn't fit anywhere. And they said, it doesn't matter because my story matters anyway, right? And so they even called their music earthquake music because literally there were earthquakes going on, right? And said, but so when we really start looking at this, sometimes you might feel like, like the earth is shaking, but still there's always the opportunity for a new story. So those three things I want to give with you as we start on this journey. So think about gezellig, that famous Dutch word. Right? Gezellig, the blues, and holy hip hop. All right? So I'm going to start. Krikra. Krikra. In Suriname, when a good story is about to begin, that's how they announce it. Krikra. My name is Aminata Cairo, and I am a mother, daughter, sister, dancer, psychologist, anthropologist of Surinamese descent, a former Dutch and current American nationality, a former lecturer of inclusive education, the first Black lecturer in the Netherlands, and a Lyman T. Johnson scholar. I start with this introduction as it is the story I bring to the table. I am a storyteller, or so I've been told. One night, at an event organized by students, after my speech and during the break, before the next part of the program, I stood near the person who was going to present after me. Unaware of my presence, he spoke freely. She is nice, but she's a storyteller. My presentation has content. It stung a little, I must admit, but I thought, well, that's interesting. Apparently, this person believed that stories had little true informative value. It was especially interesting to me since he came from a Northern African culture known for its storytelling and poetry. I wondered if he was aware of this fact, and if so, why he chose not to value it. I didn't confront him. He was entitled to his opinion, but I stored the experience. Storytelling is not always appreciated or taken seriously. We tell stories to children or for entertainment. However, as a part of my heritage, storytelling is also a means to learn your place in the family and affirm your existence in the world as a whole. I come from a family of storytellers, from a culture where oral abilities are heralded as extremely valuable. I remember my late uncle, one of the greatest storytellers in Suriname. He would tell me how, as a child, he and his siblings would sneak out at night and crawl under the house to get within earshot of the adults. There was no television, so the adults would gather and tell stories in the shared courtyard. Here they would gather with relatives and neighbors and share stories, taktori. Some were pure for entertainment, others were a mixture of wise lessons in entertainment, the so-called ondrofinitori. There might be critters underneath the house, and being caught would result in corporal punishment for sure. Yet, the risk was worth it. The stories would never disappoint, and the later it would get, the looser and more risque the stories would become. Those stories shaped him, and in turn, they shaped me. Those with traditions of storytelling believe that stories touch us and affect us on a deep level. Hence, the message of his story might not become clear to us until weeks, months, or even years later. Stories can stir something deep within us and plant a seed for change that will sprout when the time is right. One of my greatest sources of inspiration, Louis Mail Madrona, blends his Native American heritage and teachings with his Western side. He uses stories as part of his healing methodology. He shared with me that the illnesses we experience as part of a larger storied experience, and that in order to facilitate healing, we have to change the story. He told me that among the early Cherokee, if various healing modalities offered no improvement to someone suffering from illness, they would remove them from their family and village and settle them into a whole new family in another village. They would receive a new name and identity, basically a new story, similar to our present-day witness protection program. By being totally cut off from their old story that inevitably linked them to their illness, they were forced to live a new story. This illustrates not only how central our stories are to our well-being, but also that our stories are interwoven with those of others. Our lived stories are shaped by the interconnectedness with other people's stories. When we get sick, our illness becomes part of the stories around us. People's stories affect us, and ours affect theirs. And sometimes, in order to change, we have to radically disrupt our stories and create totally new ones. This storytelling approach to change speaks to me and makes sense to me. We are each living a story which we participate in as being valid. If you want to change that story, we just have to change it. But before we can change it, we have to understand the story and how it works. Subsequently, we have to understand the effort it requires to change and be brave enough to follow through. After all, some of the stories we participate in are, in fact, not valid at all, but have been around for so long that we have accepted them as normal and receive comfort from its normalcy. My academic training has facilitated a narrative approach as well. As a clinical psychologist, my clients entrusted me with their stories, and by joining with their stories, even for a short time, I was able to assist them in their journeys, seeking to alter those stories. I then studied anthropology, which focuses explicitly on the process of unearthing people's stories, and is the perfect vehicle to assist people in telling their own stories. My lifetime of experience with and through stories has brought me to what I do today, which is hold space. Specifically, I hold space for the stories that are normally overlooked, silenced, marginalized, or dismissed. My ultimate goal is to normalize these spaces as part of the larger, multi-storied mosaic. If the larger space is transformed by it, then that is beautiful. However, this is not what I set out to do, not anymore. Striving for that goal, celebrated in the ideas of diversity and inclusion, merely leads to disappointment, I have found. Terms such as diversity and inclusion are misleading. Diversity and inclusion practices tend to misdirect people and focus on the visible presence or absence of marginalized stories in the larger, dominant space. These practices often fail to address how we relate in those spaces and the inherent inequalities maintained within them. Unless we not only acknowledge, but also change the way how we do stories in these spaces, nothing will really change, and the space shaped by dominant stories will prevail. I no longer try to pursue change in the larger dominant sphere, but instead focus on the smaller spaces in front of me that I can influence. Initially, throughout this book, I will use the term of diversity and inclusion as they are commonly used. However, as the story progresses, I will more and more remove myself from that terminology as it reflects my own distancing from the concepts. Instead, I will increasingly make references to holding space. Because we need to hold space for people to stand and have their story heard without censorship, judgment, ridicule, or silencing. We need to hold spaces where people are treated with dignity, humanity, and respect. And that's what I intend to do, using stories. After all, I am a storyteller, or so I've been told. As we are starting to think about stories and changing these stories, I want to start with a basic concept that I use, because one of the things I said is that you have to understand how stories work, right? So let me share that. Can I have the next slide, please? Yes. So this, and I'm going to start with a story. So this drawing has been made by my son. Let me brag about my son a little bit. So my son went to Arts Institute. He's an animator, studied comic book art, and so this is one of his things. So he's very keen on there need to be better images for girls. So this is one of his things that he drew. Is, because he teaches me a lot because the images are always linked also to the toy industry, and for some reason they focus a lot on boys, but none of them go. Anyway, so a number of years ago, I took my son to college in the U.S. U.S., big place. Well, this is also a very big country. But 10 to 12 hours in car, and I'm taking my baby. This is my firstborn. So you're kind of excited. My child's going to college, but, you have all kinds of stuff going on. Not gezellig, right? A little uncomfortable. But so then we got there, and it was kind of okay. Because, artists a little different, right? So here we get to this city, and it's all taken over by this university, the University of the Arts. And it's like, oh, these are your people. This is good. Yes, go do your thing. Go be with your people. So, so we were good. So we were there 2-3 days. Third day, you brought into this big basketball arena. Very American, right? So you're there with all these first-year students and their parents, and there's a sound show and the lights, and you one of us, T-shirts thrown into the, you're just like, wow, it's a show. And then they go, all African-American students stand up, Latino students stand up, Asian students stand up, Native American students stand up, international students stand up, very American. I live in the Netherlands now. They would never, ever do that. But in America, oh yes, right? So stand up, look and see how diverse we are. Look at all the diversity. And indeed, it was very diverse, very impressive. So we say our goodbyes, do your thing, very good. 3 weeks later, he calls me up, Ma, guess what? We're starting art history. We are skipping African art history. We're skipping Asian art history. We're skipping Oceanic art history. The only history that we're studying is European art history. Next slide, please. And click on yes. So what you're saying is out of that range, out of that wealth of all those stories, there's one story that we're going to study. Of course, we're going to study this story, right? This story that is then valid, important, validated, that becomes the dominant story. And what happens to those other stories? They become less than, overlooked, marginalized. Oh, if we have some time left over, cute, et cetera, right? And so it's not just that my son didn't get to hear about African art history, but none of these other students got to hear about it either, right? And so what we see is, again, that we have this wealth, this richness of stories, and there's a story that's become dominant, and the rest that has become less than. That different means automatically less than. And so my goal is, how do we get to treat all these stories as valid? That's the challenge, right? And so this is not just about the content of stories, this is also about how we do stories, right? So I come from academia, you're in academia. So for instance, when we do research, well, it had better be evidence-based. There's nothing wrong with evidence-based, but there's a lot of different ways of engaging knowledge. I come from a culture, I think you do too. If you really want to know something, you go to your auntie, you go to your grandmother, you go to your grandfather. They didn't write books, but it's valid knowledge. But it's, that's cute. It's not real knowledge, right? Right? So again, the challenge is, how do we treat all these stories as valid? Right? When it comes to this diversity, this inclusion thing, that's the work. That's the work, and that's the challenge. Now, there's nobody who's going to say, of course, that's not a good idea. Everybody's going to, well, of course you want to treat all stories as valid. Yeah, that's what they say. However, this didn't happen overnight. This took hundreds of years for us to get here, right? And so there's all kinds of mechanisms that have contributed to that. And there's all kinds of mechanisms that maintain this. So the moment you try to, like, all kinds of stuff starts happening. And we're right back here, right? And so again, so the challenge is, how do we disrupt? How do we break through, knowing that it might not be gezellig, might be a little uncomfortable, right? And so we're at a point now where in particular people your age, younger people, are starting to speak up and say, we want to be heard, we want to be seen, what you're doing is not enough. And so the confrontation is, it's not gezellig. It's very uncomfortable. And so that's the work. How do we create these spaces, knowing that we need to create different spaces? How do we do that? Because what we see in the world of diversity and inclusion now, we see, okay, there's now this awareness. At least we're at the point that there's awareness, right? We're aware. And so now it's like, you know what? It's true, we never heard these stories. You can come, but when you come, adapt to us 100%, right? And so these people have been overlooked, silenced. Yeah, we want to hear your story. And you know what these people say? Are you kidding me? For what? No, I don't trust you. All this time, I wasn't allowed to really be me, and all of a sudden you want to consume my story? No, right? So it's not that easy, right? So how do we create relationships so people will feel safe, so they will actually share their story? And it's not just you can come and share your story if it's done in a way that's suitable to me, that pleases me, that I understand in my way, because a lot of times that's what happens, right? So the challenge is, again, not to do this, but how, if we're going to create a new story, if we invite these other stories in, then how collectively are we going to write a new story? That's the work, all right? So again, something else I introduced you. So I purposely, I use the terminology dominant in the other. That's what I use. There's a lot of other terminology out there. You hear a lot about white privilege these days. White privilege is a theory. It's very helpful, but this is not just about whiteness. Sometimes it's about whiteness, people of color. Sometimes about men versus women. Sometimes about women versus men. Sometimes about adults versus children. Sometimes it's I'm from the city, you're from the rural area. Sometimes I'm LGB and you're the T. Sometimes if I have money, you don't. Sometimes I work on the 4th floor and you work on the 1st floor. All that to say, all of us are in the position of the dominant sometime, and all of us are in the position of the other sometime. All of us, depending on the situation, depending on the context, is where you are. And this is a position of power and privilege, and let me be clear, there's nothing wrong with power and privilege. Shoot, I like power and privilege, but it's about how do you use that power and privilege, right? I can say I have a PhD and you don't, or I can say I have a PhD so I can open the door for you. How do you use your position, right? And so, and I also want to be clear about that because, sometimes there's hierarchy. This can be about leadership. This can be about responsibility. So it's not always a hierarchy is wrong. Sometimes it's just that way. But does different automatically means less? That's the difference, right? Just because you're different or just because we're not on the same level doesn't mean I need to demean you or devalue you. That's what it's about, okay? So I'm going to share a story with you when I was in that position of the other. I arrived in Suriname in 2003 with my 2 boys, ready with a 2-year plan to pursue research for my anthropology dissertation. I had looked forward to the familiar Surinamese food and sunshine, but somehow it didn't suit me as it usually did. After a few more weeks of feeling out of sorts, I came to the horrifying realization that I might be pregnant, something that was indeed confirmed. Prior to leaving for Suriname, I had said goodbye to the man with whom I had spent the summer. Having met more than a year before in the Netherlands and having talked with each other on the phone for well over a year, we decided to spend time together to see if a relationship was possible. It wasn't necessarily horrible, but it was clear that we were not as compatible as we had seemed on the phone. We had said our goodbyes, both with the unspoken understanding that we would not see each other again. As the news of my pregnancy became more known, several women in my circle would approach me and ask me, If I was sure that I wanted to stay in Suriname to have the baby, did I not want to go back to the United States and have the baby over there? I did not understand their concern. Don't people have babies in Suriname every day? Furthermore, here in Suriname, I had relatives, while in the United States, I did not. So I moved forward as planned. When I further engaged the healthcare system, however, I understood their concern. I noticed a pattern as I went to consultations. Most of the women were there with their partners, except for the Afro-Surinamese. Now, it is quite possible that the partners of those Afro-Surinamese women were working and not able to come. But it was still interesting and somewhat depressing that the Chinese, Javanese, and Hindustani women, and also some of the Maroon women, almost always were accompanied. The doctor was a light-skinned man, a Dogla, meaning of mixed descent, and generally of the higher class. He was kind but very information-oriented. I was quite aware that I was in a different medical culture than the United States, one where doctors have quite high authoritative status. They instruct, and you follow orders. It was then with the same informative tone he informed me one day that my blood test showed I had hepatitis C. This would mean that I would not be able to breastfeed my baby when it was born, but I shouldn't worry about it too much yet. With that, my session was finished. I left the hospital stunned. I had just been informed that I had an incurable disease. Determined not to give in to despair I felt creeping over me, I went straight to the internet cafe. One thing I could do was research. I searched the websites of the CDC in the US and the GGZ, the Dutch equivalent in the Netherlands. I found out that indeed you can breastfeed if you are infected with hepatitis C, if certain medicines are given to the mother right after birth. I found out that those medicines were not provided at my hospital, but they were at the public hospital because more poor women came there who needed to breastfeed. The explanation given for this discrepancy was that the hospital I was using in Suriname was apparently a hospital where more affluent women could afford to buy formula. I subsequently called pharmacists and the hospital to ask about the possible cost of the medicine and how long it took to deliver. I made 2 packets with all of this information and gave one to the pediatrician assigned to newborn babies, an older doctor, as well as my doctor. The pediatrician was very grateful and thanked me for all the hard work I had done. My doctor was outraged and yelled at me. "What was this? This was unnecessary. I had overreacted. Didn't he tell me not to worry?" And on he went in his temper tantrum. I sat calmly and stared at him as he raged, backed up by my female ancestors, I'm sure. There was nothing this man could say to move or shake me. This was, after all, about the welfare of my baby. You see, 14 years earlier, at age 23, I was married, a graduate student, and pregnant with my first child. I lived in student housing and had gone to the clinic where a midwife followed my progress. In Kentucky, where I was living, midwives are not allowed to deliver babies in the hospital. Thus, as time got closer, I would have to see the doctor. This doctor was specifically assigned to work with poor people. The waiting room would always be packed, and you had a maximum of 15 minutes with the doctor, the total opposite of the loving care I had received from the midwife. The doctor would barely look up from his file and never spoke more than a few words to me, except one time when he realized I was from the Netherlands. And he proceeded to tell me how his son had died on a trip to Europe walking along the railroad tracks. That was a very awkward, one-sided conversation. During the delivery, he came in, told me to push, caught the baby, and handed it off to the nurse. They didn't let me hold the baby, but immediately took it away. "You will see him later," I was told. The doctor left too and didn't come back. I never said anything. I regret to this day that I did not demand to see or hold my baby right after he was born. I was young and poor, and that is how they treated me. This time, however, things were different. I was 37, a mother of 2, and had a degree in medical anthropology. I knew what I was talking about. But more than anything, my age and life experience made it so that I was not fazed in the least by the doctor's dominant status. He gave me the option to have my blood retested at an independent lab, but I would have to pay for it. I left and got tested again. When I returned, there was a different doctor in front of me. He apologized profusely for his behavior and what I went through, something he would do each subsequent time he saw me. It turns out I was not infected with hepatitis C, but that the hospital sample had been contaminated. There were 6 other women who had already started treatment whose blood results were also contaminated. 3 weeks after my son was born, the secretary of the pediatrician called me to let me know that due to my research, the hospital policy was going to be changed. Women were no longer going to be told that they could not breastfeed if infected, and the medicine was going to be made available to all women as part of standard procedure. So again, we have this dominant and the other, depending on the situation and depending on the context. And so one of the things that as we start looking at these stories and what is my position within this story is also to start thinking, so then how do I navigate? How do I navigate this story when I might not have certain powers, when I might not have certain privileges, but I'm here and I matter and my story matters? You might not think that my story matters, but I know that my story matters. And that what carries me, that's what I'm connected to, my ancestors, my parents, they think my story matters. And so that's what I carry with me. And so in this case, I was like, but at least I can do some research. At least that's one thing I can do. So do not underestimate this education that you are getting, what it can mean to your life, right? And how you can advocate for others, with your education. And so there's another story I want to share with you, staying with this idea of dominant and the other, another concept that we have is positionality. And the term positionality is a lot of times used in research. When a researcher goes to a side, it's like, well, you are of a certain position. And even when you want to be kind of an equal status, you're never on equal status with the people there because you represent a university and all that. But this way of thinking of positionality goes beyond that. And it says that the moment you are born, just by getting breath, you stand in relationship to people in a certain way. It has nothing, just because the fact that you're born in a certain body, in a certain location, speaking a certain language, you have certain privileges, and you haven't done anything. You haven't done anything wrong. All you did was, you caught breath. But because of the histories and the stories around you, it means something as far as, what is available to you, what's not available to you. And that doesn't mean that you cannot do anything, but just, to keep that in mind. So I want to share another story with you. As an 18-year-old, having been born and raised in metropolitan Amsterdam, I left for adventure and went to pursue my education in rural Kentucky in the United States. The culture shock, going from a metropolitan international city to the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, is beyond anything I could put into words. I cried for 3 days after I arrived, wondering what I had gotten myself into. But I adapted and adjusted and actually came to love my experience. I stayed in the residence house. In my first year, we still had only one telephone for the whole floor. Throughout the day, you would hear girls running up and down the halls, waiting and hoping for phone calls, mostly from boyfriends. Pretty soon, we had a Friday evening routine, however. We all knew that on Friday evening, at a certain time, Peggy Sue would receive a call from home. Peggy Sue, don't answer the phone. You know who it is. Peggy Sue did know who it was and would always dutifully answer the call. Peggy Sue was born and bred in Kentucky, raised on a farm not far from the college. Every Friday night, her folks would call her to ask her when she would come home. Peggy Sue, ain't you ready to call it quits yet? A girl ain't got no business getting an education. Just come on home to the farm and get married. Peggy Sue would listen and be ever so polite. Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. Yes, sir. No, sir. While tears would be streaming down her face. Every Friday, we would beg her not to answer the phone. Every Friday, she would stand there crying until one day she didn't. Peggy Sue gave in and went home. I often tell this story to my students to tell them about the complexities of diversity. I was Black, female, international, and across the ocean from my family, by all accounts, clearly the other, and perhaps in need of special attention and assistance. Peggy Sue was white and local, yet Peggy Sue was farther from home than I ever was. When we hold space, we don't know what kind of stories are present in the space. We do not know the kinds of sacrifices people have made or are making to be in the space. I graduated from college and went on to pursue my master's degree in a nearby city. One day I was walking and ran into Peggy Sue. She shared that she had gone home and had married as desired by her family. Her married life had been difficult, however. Her husband was involved in drugs, something quite common in rural Kentucky with a desperate economy. She had 2 children in the marriage and eventually chose better for herself and her children. She divorced her husband and went back to college. I am back, and I'm determined to finish this time. I looked at her, saw her confidence, and knew that she meant it. I'm convinced that Peggy Sue is somewhere out there with a college degree. I also shared this part of the story to show that even though Peggy Sue's path was confined by the story she was born into, a narrative in which women should not pursue education, she was able to transform that narrative. She might not have done it in a way we would normally expect. She had sacrifices to make and obstacles to overcome, far greater than many of her peers, but she did. I am sure she had helpers along the way, seen and unseen, that inspired her to make some changes in spite of. I would like to think that even we, her college peers, in our encouragement and example, placed some seeds of inspiration that sprouted later. But I expect that more than likely, her children were her ultimate sources of inspiration. It is all speculation, of course. The lesson here is that we step into these greater communal narratives just by drawing breath. Not only does it shape the obstacles we encounter or the privileges we receive, but it shapes especially how we stand in relationship to each other. Consequently, the just work hard enough and you can become anything you want trope is an idealistic myth. We're not necessarily locked into our positionalities, but our positionalities surely affect the struggles, choices, and sacrifices we need to make to walk our paths. Similarly, understanding our positionality will also help us understand some of the behaviors we encounter when we interact with each other. Mother, mother, may I travel? Yes, my child, you may, but heed all the gifts and obstacles you will encounter on your path. Thank you. And so, this work then is to understand how these stories work, how we're born into these stories, and not only how do we navigate, but how do we create spaces for others, right? And again, by the fact that you're getting this education, it's going to put you in a position to open up some doors, to open up some ways for others. And it's not necessarily what you do, but it's about how do you treat people? How are you present? And so one of the things I want to give you is that it's a lot of times in academia, a lot of times people come to me, well, give me the 10 best practices of inclusion. They say, it's not about that, right? Because that's like an intellectual thing. How do I bring all of myself to be present, right? And everything that I'm connected to, right? How do I communicate that you are welcome, Not just by my mouth, but by my actions, by showing up and how I treat you. So how do you bring all of this? So even as far as your body, what is the body language that you use? I'm really open and interested in what you have to say. My mouth might say that, but my body language is giving you a totally different message. And maybe you're cold and you stand like this a lot. Okay, but if you want to give the image that you're an open person, you might need to change how you're standing. So how do I use this body to support the message that I actually want to bring, right? How do I enter the room? How am I present when things get heated? How do I, okay, we're going to be okay. It's the little things, the little things that we use. So I have another story about embodiment. Put your back into it, putting your best foot forward. Hop right to it. Put your shoulder to the wheel. Our language is full of references of using the physical body as an essential catalyst for action. Yet, when it comes to the traditional approach to holding space, we tend to prioritize the intellect. Once I have enough information, I will know what to do. There are plenty of people who will tell you what to do, but not necessarily how. Interventions are well thought out, but remain stuck in the brain and refuse to seep through to the rest of the body. We have mastered the act of thinking and planning, but continuously fall short of doing. We value highly the art of understanding, but are still ill-equipped at fully being. Interestingly, it is our body that is our biggest obstruction when it comes to implementing all of these wonderful things we are inventing for holding space. Because of our disconnection between mind and body, we freak out or freeze the moment feelings of ongezelligheid appear in our bodies. It feels uncomfortable, hence there must be something wrong. Therefore, I will withdraw into a mode where that feeling of ongezelligheid is gone, or at least manageable. One can have it all figured out in their head, know exactly what to do, but taking that first step into action is the biggest hurdle. Yvonne Daniel, in her study of African diaspora dance, has explored in depth the phenomenon of embodied knowledge. She refers to intellectual knowledge as disembodied knowledge, as knowledge that is compartmentalized and limited in perspective. In order for it to be complete, it needs to be infused with physical, intuitive, and spiritual information. She states that because this type of knowledge does not easily lend itself to empirical analysis, and rejects the European and American mind-body duality, it is not accepted as valid by the dominant realm. She purports that practitioners of African diaspora traditions have embraced both forms of knowledge and therefore have a more holistic frame of reference with which they engage the world. I believe the mind-body split is not as valued as it once was. There are many health, sport, and therapy practices that have promoted the importance of the body as an essential part of our culture. Yet, in general, and in the dominant realm especially, the body remains secondary to the intellectual domain. The fortress of information has become such a staple of the culture that the intellect receives preference over bodily sensing or intuition. The separation of the body from the mind does not just go back to the elevation of the mind and the duality as promoted by Descartes. This development went hand in hand with Christian religion, which regarded bodily urges and expressions as sinful, or where bodily functions such as giving birth or breastfeeding were seen as natural, hence closer to nature, hence less intellectually inclined. The closer to nature, the more primitive. Embracing the body as an essential part of knowledge keeping or knowledge production is quite a challenge then, where this disdain of the body is such a long-standing and ingrained part of the general story. We don't just tend to favor our mind over the body, we have learned to distrust and ignore our body's capacity as an ingrained and valuable messenger. Yet, we know the significance when somebody shows up and brings all of themselves. We know the difference between somebody who expresses care and concern and the person who, without being asked, showed up to assist and is fully present. There is an urgency to holding space. There's an urgency to show up fully committed, body, mind, and spirit. People have been talking and writing with all kinds of beautiful insights for decades without any significant change. The subsequent level of disappointment and distrust is so high that we need to see the commitment in our embodied actions. In addition, there is a need for all of this intellectual knowledge to become more united with an active body. Great intentions do not get you across the mountains. Walking does. Showing up and using our bodies fully is not necessarily about being large and visible. It can be about being subtle. Are we using all our senses? Do we listen to our senses? We've been taught to distrust our senses for the sake of the intellect. And we have been tricked into thinking that the first physical sign of ongezelligheid confirms that a certain situation is unbearable and thus is to be avoided. We have to relearn the potential of our body as a source of information and communication. We have to relearn how to reconnect and align our bodies with our intellect and our extended sense of self. We have to unlearn to judge certain feelings of unpleasantness as signals of something being wrong, and instead appreciate them for signals as means to inform us. If we build up that muscle through practice and combine it with the sound mind and trusting an element of non-knowing, we can reach that embodied knowledge that Yvonne Daniel was talking about. It will enable us to move and act with full confidence and trust in creating alternate spaces. I had such a profound experience myself. In the days when I was still working in The Hague as a lecturer, I would ride my bike to the station every day, about 4 to 6 minutes, where I would take the train. This particular day, I had a flat tire. I could walk for about 12 minutes, or if I timed it correctly, I could take the bus. I opted for the bus. As I got on the bus, there was a young man of African descent, probably Surinamese heritage, around age 20 or so, sitting on the first chair opposite to the bus driver. I sat down 1 or 2 seats behind him on the seat that was perpendicular to his position. I could see him to my right, and I could see the rest of the bus. There were quite a few people in the bus at this time of the morning, all on their way to work, no doubt. He was wearing earbuds, but the music was still loud. The bus driver asked him in a friendly manner if he could turn the music down. The young man immediately responded very aggressively and loudly and told the bus driver in no uncertain terms to mind his own business. An exchange started to take place that quickly became louder and more aggressive. A Surinamese lady to my left joins in. "You are wrong. You are disrespectful. The bus driver asked you nicely. All you have to do is listen." I recognized the sentiment immediately. A Surinamese mama who does not tolerate public misbehavior. It is oh so familiar. However, her tone only adds fuel to the fire. The young man then turns toward her and immediately starts yelling at her to stay out of his business. Profanities are hurled. He alternates between yelling at her and the bus driver. The rest of the people are tense. I take a deep breath and listen and watch. A white lady gets up and goes and sits beside the Surinamese lady. Good, so she is protected. But the young man does not let up. The bus is stopped by now, and the bus driver is threatening to call the police. As I'm sitting there, I feel the familiar burn in my belly. My ancestors are signaling me, and I know I will have to do something. Between my Po and my father and who knows how many others, I tune into that presence and know the time to act is near. I'm just waiting for that moment. I'm purely listening and sensing and ready to respond. Now, for clarification, one has to understand that I bring a particular story to this moment. First, I am a mother of 3 black sons, so I'm not afraid of young black men. If anything, I have a special affinity for them. Secondly, I come from the United States, where behavior like this will get a young black man killed. I have very strong feeling about standing by versus getting involved with young black men prior to things escalating with the police. I'd rather have them interact with me than with the police. It can be the difference between life or death. From me, they can get some compassion. From the police, more than likely they will not. When the young man stood up and started walking towards the bus driver while yelling and threatening, "What are you going to do about it?" I stood up. It was as if my body moved by itself. I took a deep breath, called upon my people, yippee me, y'all better help me out, and slowly started to walk towards the young man, all the while making eye contact. I didn't charge him, but moved and talked slowly in my most soothing voice. "Hey man, I see that you're angry. I am so sorry you are having a hard time this morning, but I know you're not going to hit this man. So what are you going to do?" I stopped where I stood, gave him his space. He looked me dead in the eye, angrily. Silence. I waited. He took a deep breath, lowered his eyes, and started to walk towards me. He passed me and kept walking to the end of the bus. I moved forward to the bus driver and asked if he was okay. The situation was de-escalated. Now, I don't recommend for people to start jumping into potential fights. That is not what this story is about. This experience was about surrendering and being fully present and connected. There were a lot of factors that came together in this moment. When I got up and moved, it wasn't a conscious decision. It wasn't informed. It was a fully embodied, informed action. It was the result of years of fine-tuning and learning and trusting in all that I'm connected to. He could have physically attacked me. which is why I was as non-threatening as possible and why I gave him his space. But even that chance I was willing to take. I would rather he attack me than get into it with the police. No young black man will die on my watch if I can help it. My body, mind, and spirit are committed to that reality. When I engage people with singing, dancing, or theater activities, we're doing it to have fun and to lower inhibitions, but also to build on that muscle of embodied knowledge. People don't always get that, and that's okay. They don't understand the urgency of being able to show up fully committed. That's why I share this story. Grantangi. Thank you for the lesson that in order to show up fully, we have to reconnect and reinvest in our embodied knowledge.
Students at Yale.
We can't breathe.
To demonstrators blocking an interstate in Berkeley, California, and even in London.
I'm not compliant with an unlawful arrest.
Demonstrators this week have been protesting deadly use of force by police, primarily against African American men. The movement's flashpoint, the August 9th death of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. Now, Brown's parents will walk side by side on Saturday with two other families whose sons died in encounters with police. Tamir Rice, the 12-year-old who was shot to death in November by a Cleveland officer after holding a pellet gun. And Eric Garner, who died in July after a New York City police officer put an arm around Garner's throat.
I think we all hope and pray that when it's our child, you don't have to see it anymore. And every time you see another one, it takes you right back to the day that it happened to you.
George Floyd's death at the hand of Minneapolis police officers has sparked angry protests all across the country today. The video of an officer with his knee on Floyd's neck as Floyd pleads for his life has shot the narrative.
My stomach hurts, my neck hurts, everything hurts. I need some water or something. Please.
Justice Minneapolis, de plek waar George Floyd stierf.
It's not safe out here.
The cold are getting louder.
Ja, en op sommige plekken lijkt het wel oorlog.
Can't breathe officer.
Na de gewelddadige dood van George Floyd nemen ook gewelddadige protesten hand over hand in Sundance Grant.
Grandma's hands clapped and church on Sunday morning. Grandma's hands played the tambourine so well. Grandma's hands used to issue steady warning. She said, baby, don't you run so fast. Might fall on a piece of glass. Snakes growing in that grass. Grandma's hands.
Grandma's hands soothe the local unwed mother. Grandma's hands used to ache sometimes and swell. Grandma's hands used to lift her face and tell her, she said, baby, grandma, understand that you really love that man. Put yourself in Jesus' hands, grandma's hands. Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water.
Oh, who's that coming all dressed in white?
God's gonna trouble the water.
Oh, it must be one of those Israelites.
God's gonna trouble the water.
Oh, who's that coming coming all dressed in red.
God's gonna trouble the wide eye.
Oh, it must be one of those that Moses led. Wade in the water.
Wade in the water,
Children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Grandma said, baby, don't you run so fast.
I fall on a piece of glass.
Might be snakes there in the grass. Grandma's hand. Grandma's hand. Grandma's hand.
That young man that hugged me is my son. So I have one son that draws, and I have one son that sings. And so I am at the University of the Arts right now. Before that, I was at the Hague University, where I was over inclusive education, and now I'm a research professor in social justice and diversity in the arts. And I'm happy I'm there because as we are starting to create these new stories, you get ripped open, it's not gezellig. You need the arts, right? When it's about that we want to expand people's horizons, you do that through the arts. Is when you look at a painting, it's like, oh, never thought about that, right? Sometimes you don't have the words. I might not be able to speak on it, but I can make music, I can sing, I can dance, whatever. And so that needs to be part of our toolbox. I know you're studying a lot, and that's very important, but it cannot just be about this, this, this. How do you express? How do you release? How do you heal, right? And we have that as part of our traditions. You have 1,000, you have incredible, phenomenal traditions. When it comes to music, when it comes to, that's a resource, right? So I want to share that with you. And I mean, I'm so honored to be in India. You don't know, this has been a dream. Like, yes, I'm here, I'm on Indian soil, because, your history is just incredible and what you've given to the world. And I'll tell you a little secret. So I'm from Suriname, and in Suriname, we have a large Indian population who came in the late 1800s. So when I see Indian people, I think, oh, this is home. and I forget, of course, they have their own country. They have India, Bangladesh, and all of Pakistan. But still, when I see people, I think of Surinamese people. So I feel very much at home. And so that's why, again, the wealth, of your culture that I was introduced to at home. So again, we need to find that balance. The studying is important, and yes, and you read and you write and all of that. But sometimes you need to sing, sometimes you need to dance, sometimes you need to listen to music, sometimes you need to paint, all those things, all right? So keep that in mind. In Suriname, when you state your name, people generally know which part of the country you hail from. With a population of less than 500,000 and a history of plantation slavery, last names of those of African descent are easily traceable to the plantations one's ancestors hailed from. As such, your being is linked to a particular place, a distinct physical location. The highways that connected the plantations were the riverways. Thus, one's identity is often also connected to a certain river. A visit to family ground usually begins with the encouragement to go say hello to the ancestors and nature spirits. Little cousins, used to the ritual, jump out of the car and run around yelling, "Famiri undoro!" Family, we have arrived. We are here. From very young, they are taught that they are connected to their ancestors, but also to the natural physical environment. As societies evolved from reliance on hunter-gatherers to food production, the role of community and connection to the environment was maintained. As we've come through the industrial age, however, and are now in the information age, the rise of individuality and disconnection from our natural environment has taken over. The argument can be made that in our current information age-oriented society, the need for connection is still being expressed, but via digital channels. Indeed, the COVID-19 pandemic has also shown that underneath it all, we are still social human beings, and that we need connection for our mental survival. Still, our connection to nature has often been reduced to recreational or other enjoyable practices. Unless you are a farmer, but not necessarily as a core part of our being and relating to each other. When we say aho metakuyasi, and we say me and all my relations, we mean we are connected to all and include the natural world in that. In Suriname as well, the sense of self is extended. In times of disharmony, one is easily encouraged to go and engage with those extended forces one is connected to. Take water and pour it into the earth while talking to ancestors or spiritual forces. When I moved to Suriname in 2003 to do research for my anthropology dissertation and stayed at a particular house, I couldn't find rest. My mind kept racing at night and I always felt on edge. When I shared with my aunties my problem, they came to my house and set me down. They explained to me that every place has a spirit. They told me I needed to introduce myself to the environment and make my intentions clear. I needed to pour sweet drinks to show my good intentions as I did so. Under their tutelage, I did what they told me to do. Something shifted, and I slept like a baby from that point onward. Now, was it my direct actions that made a spiritual shift? I don't know. It's possible. Was it because my intention and focus shifted? It is possible. Was it because these two women, when they heard about my state, immediately came to me, sat with me, talked with me, and guided me through a ritual? Was it because they demonstrated you're one of us and we got your back? It is possible. Frankly, I think it was a combination of all those things. Connecting to the environment can mean many things. What and who is part of our environment, seen and unseen? Is our environment constructed in a way that is nurturing or harmful to us? Are we honoring or ignoring what is part of our environment? Do we pay attention to how we are navigating that environment? Connecting to our environment means that we look outside of ourselves and understand that we are part of something bigger. It means giving up some illusionary control and tapping into that environment, even if it is just for inspiration. If one has a spiritual practice, it can be as in-depth as my aunties demonstrated. But if one does not have that conviction, there is still room to tune into the environment. How is the space organized in which we gather? What is the temperature, air quality, smell, soundscape like? Are there physical obstructions that prevent people from connecting? Is the environment conducive to surrendering? This is not a skill one acquires overnight. It is a skill based in sensing. It's not to be confused with intuition, which can be translated into feeling and then knowing. Tuning into the environment does not need to be linked to knowing. Instead, it is about paying attention and then to open up to the connection that was already there. One has to trust then and surrender and be willing to give up control. I once learned this lesson in a powerful way. At age 26, I had moved with my 3-year-old son from Kentucky to Maryland and worked in Washington, D.C. People had warned me about D.C., and indeed it was different. D.C. is an ambitious town. People will smile in your face while going behind your back trying to steal your job. It had happened to me more than once, with Black women I trusted no less. In addition, I worked in a place that I loved and where I had a lot of responsibility, but where there were all kinds of irregularities. I noticed the irregularities, but didn't know what to do with them. I put them aside. But the pile kept getting higher and higher. It became clear that this wonderful job was more than likely a front for some illegal activities. My boss, who had initially treated me as his little sister, also started to act differently as he got more involved in what he was doing. In the meantime, my finances were being compromised, while the excuses kept coming. I called my ex and told him I needed him to take care of our son. He said, sure. And that weekend, I made a 12-hour drive to Kentucky, dropped off my son, spent the night, and made a 12-hour drive back. What to do? Every day, I drove to work, incredibly tense, gnawing my teeth. My hands were gripping the steering wheel, and I kept beating myself up for being so naive and getting involved in this situation. And the tension did not let up when I was at work. When I drove back home from work, it was the same. Interestingly, my drive back and forth to work was across the most beautiful parkway, lined with the most beautiful trees, for a stretch of at least 20 to 25 minutes. Here was my natural medicine, but I didn't see it. I was just staring ahead with gritted teeth, cursing to myself in a state of frustration. until one day I looked up. I saw those beautiful trees waving at me in the most fantastic fall colors. I looked up and saw them, really saw them. And for the whole ride, I just let their stillness and relentless waving and beauty wash over me. I relaxed my hands, unlocked my jaw, and slowly peace washed over me. When I got to work, I resigned that day, packed up, and left. I called the IRS to make sure that the irregularities on my paycheck were reported. I went to 5 different temporary employment agencies and signed up for work. I knew I would be fine and went home. Within a week, I was working at a law firm with wonderful, supportive employers. Within a month, I was able to go and get my son back. Did the trees literally heal me? My aunties might say the spirit of them did. It is possible. The way I look at it is that I chose to connect with their message of peacefulness and beauty. The waving back and forth, that rhythm, was like a well-needed massage and forced the crack that I needed to shift from focusing on the darkness towards all the beauty that was still out there. I shifted from being in a state of tension into being in a state of calmness and being able to breathe. That, in turn, allowed me to move forward to create a new story for myself. Not a story where I was stuck, but one where I was free. The lesson is that these sources of inspiration and nourishment are in our environment all the time and always at our disposal. What are we honoring and what are we ignoring? Tuning in and surrendering to that connection is a skill that we can develop and use to hold space for each other. Grantangi. Thank you for the gift of abundance and nourishment in our environment and teaching us that we can partake in it for holding space at any time. Thank you. All right, so I've talked a whole lot. And you've listened very attentively, so thank you for that. But now I want you to do something, right? I hope you got something from these stories that I shared with you. And I started in the beginning with honoring, your parents. We give thanks to your parents, because it's them that you are here. And so what I want you to do next, I want everybody to close your eyes. Close your eyes and get comfortable in your seat. Don't fall asleep on me. Just close your eyes. Take a deep breath in and out. One more time in and out. And as you get calm, we've honored your parents, but there have been others who have contributed to you being here. Somebody that encouraged you, somebody that inspired you, somebody said that you can do this. Maybe somebody said you cannot do this and you went out to prove them wrong. And I don't want you to think about it very hard, but whatever comes up, the first one that comes up, because there might be a lot, the first one that comes up, hold that person in your heart, embrace them. I want you to feel them. That person that has contributed to you being here. I don't know who it is. You don't have to search for it. Just be comfortable and let it rise up. And really feel that person. And when you really felt them, you can open your eyes. And I want you to say thank you. Yeah, right? That's a resource. And those nights when you're studying, but I don't know, there's somebody praying for you. There's somebody thinking of you. That's a resource. But you don't know what to do, right? You are connected. And at any given moment, you can tap into that, right? Sometimes when it gets hard, you need to go outside, touch a tree, hug a tree, something. Let the sun touch your face. You get a lot of sun here. I'm in the Netherlands, we don't get a lot of sun, right? That environment, that's a resource. The moment you think that you have to do by yourself, you're already 10 steps behind. You're not in this by yourself. All right?
Holding space. Alternative spaces to the larger dominant narrative give credence to one's value and humanity. These spaces where existence is resistance are created out of a need, an answer to an inner calling to be affirmed in this world. When you know who you are, in relation to the 7 directions You know who you are as a person and are strengthened in your relation to the world. Thus, the community surrounds you and holds the East, the South, the West, and the North. You stomp your feet, touching the earth, connecting with the soil, allowing it to hold you up, reverberating from below that Mother Earth has got you. You raise your arms up to the sky, preferably out in the air at night, affirming that you are a star child, made up of the same stuff as all the nature that surrounds you, that you are connected to all. Finally, you go inside, and transcend. This is our purpose. This is our task, to hold space for each other to use and acknowledge all of our humanity. There is a need for us, all of us, and our relations to do this love work. The love work requires us to shake off conditioned behaviors that had hundreds, if not thousands of years to develop, become seasoned, and get settled. It requires us to work on ourselves, to pick up on our conditioned habits and actively try to change them. It requires us to be honest and face our shortcomings while using our gifts and sharing them with others. It requires us to no longer ignore the signals that alert us when things go off kilter in our space. It requires that we take the collective as a starting point rather than the individual, and through understanding our connectedness, persevere to regard all people in their humanness and all of nature as our extended selves. It requires us to stay focused and committed to uplifting the community. It requires us to bring ourselves, all of ourselves, to do the work and to take care of each other, ourselves, and seek reprieve when needed. It requires us to stop, get centered, grounded, and reconnect when needed. Breathe in, breathe out. When we are no longer afraid and can orient ourselves in relation to all our relations to the East, the South, the West, and the North, when we are grounded in the earth and look up to the sky, when we can go within and transcend our limitations, we will be home and know who we are. We will hold up the space where we all can function to the best of our abilities, where we can just be and breathe. Breathe in, breathe out. That is my prayer for you, for all of us. Grantangi, thank you for joining us and honoring and holding our story.
Thank you, Dr. Cairo, for such an entertaining and enlightening presentation of your book. We appreciate having areas of development, inequalities, and diversity clarified with such a unique lens. I'm sure that your unique stories and experiences have helped us understand the importance of communicating with one another and making space for all of our stories and backgrounds that bring different values to the table. After that extremely informative and interesting talk, we are sure that we have a number of questions from the participants. So you are all welcome to raise your hand and ask a question once you are handed a microphone. And those who have joined us virtually are encouraged to ask us questions via the chat box. If there are any questions, you are encouraged to raise your hand.
I see one there.
Yeah.
Oh, that's.
Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Anushka, and my question to you is that how does the book address potential challenges or resistance that individuals or organizations may face when implementing the storytelling approach to diversity and inclusion?
Okay. So when it comes, so we are at a point now where the people up here recognize that, yeah, we don't know these stories down here. And like I said, it's like, okay, come and tell you a story. And people here are like, I don't think so. So first thing you have to do, you have to make it safe enough so that people will come. So the trust is not there because of a particular history and experience. So how do you make it safe enough for people to tell their story? And if I tell my story, will you honor my story? Or will you just consume my story? Right? Especially if it's a painful story and you expect me to share my pain, then you go, oh, well, thank you, that was nice. And then they move on and you're just now left like this. So it requires some work. So in the book, I did talk about that consumption. You have to be careful that you don't just consume. And this whole idea of, if you say that I want to hear your story, then you also have to commit to, and once you tell your story, I'm going to honor that. And so that requires some work and attention.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Good afternoon, ma'am. My name is Alakshendra. So I had a question regarding these several genres which I hear, jazz, blues, reggae, hip hop even. All these genres have been pivotal in the art of storytelling and for a very long time now. How do we not let, genres like jazz and blues go out of fashion or die? And even countries, especially in my country where it all came very late.
Yeah.
So how do we incorporate these genres, because they're very, very important in the art of storytelling, and they have been for the past 50, 60, 70 years.
Yes, great question. A lot of it, what you see even in hip hop, a lot of them, they sample. And some people can say, well, sampling is consumption, but sampling can also be about honoring, right? And so you're now learning about people that came before. And so it's to recognize that whatever story I have, somebody came before me. So as we start with our story, you never start from point zero. Somebody came before me. So what was that? And how can I honor that? So again, to be purposeful about, I've sampled this, which came from so-and-so, which, there's a story that. And so this whole idea, then your story becomes stronger too, when it's not just, it sounds good or I like it, but I actually know where it came from, what its purpose was. And so to keep celebrating. And so, because a lot of times you hear about appropriation, and so I also have a whole chapter about appropriation. As artists especially, we love it. It's an honor when people take your stuff. That's what jazz was about. Here, take it and make it better. That's what we want. But it's about, but give credit where credit is due. That's what, when you take it and start making money of it and then you forget where it came from, that's the issue. But so keep using and keep honoring and using that to create something new. Thank you.
Thank you. We encourage you to introduce yourselves before asking your question.
Good afternoon, Dr. Cairo.
Yes.
I am a faculty with SIMC. I teach in areas around research and communication theories and culture. First of all, thank you for sharing your stories and spaces with us. I'm sure that it was very liberating for a lot of audiences here. I want to understand that in these intersectionalities that you particularly talked about, one body and mind, and then your knowledge, community, and education.
Yeah.
In these intersectionalities of the body and the mind, can there be a compromise in the radical mind and the conventional cultures that we are a part of in this neoliberal world? Could you maybe share an example where you may have used your knowledge, community, and education to kind of navigate through this? Thank you.
Sure. And it starts with, because, I was trained, I went to school in Europe, and then all my academic work has been in the US. So I'm very knowledgeable about the Western way of doing everything. And it was okay, but it didn't feed my spirit, right? It only went so far. And so once I started finding there are scholars who've written from a different perspective, it was like, the heavenly gates open. It's like, oh my goodness, this stuff is here. And because it does something to me. And so the idea is, how do I bring all of myself? How do I bring the best of myself? But again, in this world, it's not necessarily designed for that. So how do I navigate? I was on a research project in a certain, we were studying, it was in the community in The Hague, where we're looking at the effects of COVID. And in particular, there's certain marginalized communities that get very negative reviews in the media. You know, they don't stick to their, because they're poor, of course it's communities of color, low income. And so we know that there are good stories there, right? But you only hear the bad stuff or you hear nothing. And so we went with the intention that we want to broaden the storyscape of this city, because I know there are other stories there. But then when we entered, and when you go with the idea of, I'm not just going to get information, but I'm going to be with and join the community, and then whatever comes up. And so initially our goal was we wanted to get the positive stories. And then we went there and one person was angry, said, I'm sick and tired of people coming in. And we were like, oh, okay. And I had to take that into consideration. So then we totally changed the research. So then it was about, how do they hold space for us? How do they welcome us in their community? And once you join, then you get to hear the stories. So then we started writing about how they held space for us, how we joined, and we were making face masks with the people and all kinds of stuff. And so my approach, I have to be humble enough that I'm not just getting data, but as a researcher, I have to be willing to be transformed by the experience myself. So I'm here hopefully to contribute something, but I also have to be open to be transformed. And I also have to be willing, like, oh, if the community doesn't want me to do this, I guess we're gonna have to do something else. And you will get the answers, but in a different way. But again, the way I was originally trained, I would have thought I was a failure because, oh my goodness, this is what I set out to do, and I cannot get this answer. And it's like, maybe you need to get another answer. Maybe it's not up to you. So your whole intention of how you enter, and with humility to this community, also with the idea that there's knowledge there that and not just I'm there to extract. So I hope, does that answer your question? Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Shreya Mohanty, and my question is, what inspired you most to use storytelling as a tool to diversify and inclusivity in the world?
Okay, because I had these academic concepts, and I wanted people to get it. So I had these concepts, and it's like, well, but if I tell a story, then people can get it. That's really how it started. And more, everybody gets stories. Everybody understands stories. Because we all use stories. And so, because we can talk in a very academic and exclusive way, and then, half the people will not get it, and then we see a very nice elite group, and we have our own little language. Or, again, I have the concepts, and then it worked. And so even like when I talk about dominant and the other, everybody gets that, And there's all kinds of other terminology people use. I'm like, yeah, but this I can use in the street, and people will get it. And so that's why I started using stories.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
I hear a voice. Oh, yes.
My name is Karanjit, and my question is, what are the underlying patterns of behavior that contribute to the reinforcement of inequalities in the validation of stories?
Oh, how much time do we have? When you look at a particular, history, colonial history, I can come and extract your resources. I can come and exploit people, and a certain mindset that went along with that, and that has been translated, and that has become part of our normal. And I think we're at a point now that we recognize that. But like I said, it took hundreds of years to get there, so you don't just get rid of it just like that, right? And that's the thing that is so ingrained that we don't even question, well, of course they get to speak first. Well, of course I will silence myself. Of course, those kind of things. And so that's where that came from. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, ma'am.
Yes.
Hello, ma'am. I
Hello.
am Ananya Singh. You talked about spirituality a lot. So I wanted to ask, what does spirituality really means to you, and how important it is in your daily life, and how important it is to have a spiritual path for everyone?
Yes. Oh, okay, big question. To me, spirituality is how you are in the world, how you connect, in the world, how you, see that. Again, I come from a particular, and I write it in the book that also, like, my family's from Suriname, But I went to America at age 18 and kind of was adopted by a Native American family. So in terms of my spiritual practices, I get a lot from my Native American, more from my Native American family than even my Surinamese family. But this idea that at the core, the main lesson is we are connected to anything and everything. And so in both my Surinamese family and my Native family, so how do you live then in harmony? How do you live in balance with that? So how you treat people, how you treat your environment, all of that, to me, is about spirituality. And the more you practice it, the more you, like you said, I talk about trust and surrender and open, because we believe you're connected, but when you sow in your head, then you forget to feel or to sense. And in particular, when I lived in Suriname for 2 years to do my research, and there I kind of reconnect. So even, especially when it comes to research, because like I have to do this interview, and these people didn't show up. That's a disaster. And it's like, oh, but somebody else showed up. And that person let you there, and that person let you there, and then you got an even better person to interview. So that totally shifts then how you approach the work. And so then I started rethinking about the role of spirituality. And in the book I mentioned, I'm sorry I'm making this long answer, but my professor, she said, you talk a lot about spiritual, you need to do some research, because there are other people who talk about it. And there's very few, but I did find somebody, his name is Shashan, I think he's Pakistani, I want to say. And he actually writes about spirituality as part of your academic practice, and that it's not something you leave at the door. And so again, so when you read something like that, it's like, oh, thank you, I'm not the only one who sees it like that. And so I think he's Canadian or something, but so that was really helpful. And to be, again, by being fully integrated, that also allows me to be the best student that I can be. So, I don't know if I...
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Dr. Caro?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
My name is Ramit Mehrotra. I really admire your breathtaking persona here. But I have a question for you.
Sure.
We live in a world which has plunged into an endless chaos. We have too many fingers to point at. We have too many bullet missiles docked to shoot at each other.
Mm-hmm.
We want to elude ourselves from the truth. We want to not look at the real picture. Mm-hmm. And we have stories to tell. And we want to tell that story.
Right.
We have an enormous community of people that will help us speak those stories. But we can't seem to get there enough, because we have some incredible self-proclaimed powers to suppress that. Mm-hmm. So as a storyteller, how do we sing that song? How do we sing that hum in such atrocious times?
Whew, that's a light question. I think first by creating the spaces where it is safe to tell that story and where you can be honored. Because a lot of times we don't really listen. We just listen half, and in the meantime, I'm already thinking about a story that can trump your story, right? And to say, okay, I'm here, and I'm listening, and I'm really listening, and I really want to taste it, even if it's not comfortable to me. Because a lot of times, if I tell my story and I tell you about pain, or if I tell what I've been through, can't you tell it in a different way? Can't you tell it in a nicer way? But, and that's where the blues come in. No, honey, sing your blues. So to say your story is allowed to be there in all of its complexities and difficulties, and we're going to sit and listen and be there with you. And when that happens, when you experience that, that changes things. And you don't need a whole bunch of people, but you can start with some, right? And people that see you and acknowledge you and feel you and say, man, wow, rough, without judgment. That's another thing. I'm not going to judge it. I might not get it, but oh, wow. I see that it moves you, and that moves me. And, and if we can do that, and I think we can do that, and I think we can practice it. But again, you don't need a whole bunch of people. You start small.
Thank you, ma'am.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good
I am Prerna Doshniwal, a student at SIMC.
Yeah.
So my question to you is, as much as this world is heading towards inclusivity and diversification, on the other end of the spectrum, we still live in a world where people are constantly gatekeeping their culture and traditions. And people at the boat ends up pretty aggressive about what they believe in. So
Definitely.
how and where do we find a middle ground?
Yes, very true. Again, it goes back to how do you show up, right? How do I show up? And and that's why it's so important. Why I said it's not just it's but how do all of me shows up. And I understand that you might not get where I come from, and you might be angry, and people who are insecure about themselves, they will respond a certain way. People are full of them and loving will respond totally differently. So the reactions that I might get, the resistance, the challenges, don't take it personal. Because that's where they are, that's where their story is at this moment in time. Now, a year from now, they might be somewhere totally different. But I can't believe, okay. So part of this is also to learn how to create some space and honor the space where they are without getting sucked in, without getting sucked into the, well, if they do this, then I want to, that's interesting. Okay, I see where you are. Have a nice day. And to not cut people off, because we also live in a world, if you don't think like me, I'm going to cancel you, right? You said what? You said what 20 years ago? Cancel, right? And so we don't forgive, right? But people are where they are. And so again, so to create that space, but it starts with, when am I still okay? And to not allow that to start doubting yourself and what you stand for and what you have to bring. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we'll take one last question.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Okay. Can we do her and then her?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
Good afternoon. I'm
Yes.
Pooja Mahabadi from SIMC, and I loved what you presented today, and I'm
Okay.
glad I was a part of this. But I have a question for you.
Sure.
How must we address the intersectionality of identities and experiences within the storytelling approach of diversity and inclusion? And that's my question, ma'am.
Okay. So when you talk about the intersectionality, you talk about the richness of the stories, right? So the fact that you can look at me and say, oh, Black woman, and that's the end of it. But I'm also a mother, I'm also a daughter, I'm also, and so can I tell those other stories too? And will you listen to those stories too? Or is it like, oh, you're a woman, so just talk about that? So all intersectionality is, again, it's the richness and the wealth of everything that contributes to who I am. And sometimes maybe I want to talk about the fact, I have a teenage son and he's smelly. Let me tell you a story. Sometimes that's the story. And can I tell that story too? It doesn't always have to be, the stereotype of who we are. And again, are we willing to listen and hold the space for that too? Because that's what makes it interesting. Because a lot of times we tune out, I know what you're going to say, or I'm only interested in this part of your story. But no, I'm interested in the other stuff. And when we feel safe enough, then you start to share more. When I know that you will actually listen to me and honor my story, then I will share more. So that's what we can give each other. Thank you. And we had one last one here.
Yeah, one last question.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello, ma'am. I'm Lisha Purbe from SITTM. I have a question. How can we bring change in someone's perspective? As it's very difficult to put a thought across people,
Yes, it
even
is.
while holding spaces.
Yes, it is.
Like, there are people who want to express their story, but there are people who don't want to listen to.
Right.
So, yeah, that's my
Yes. Yeah, as much as we want to, you can't force anybody to do anything. Although I wish, no, but you can't. But again, it's about how do you show up? It's how do you show up? Because people respond to that, and it's the little things, it's when you make people feel seen, when you make them know, that you're safe here, and I value and I appreciate you. That's what makes the difference. Sometimes it's not about what you say, but you sat with me when I was feeling bad. You came and looked at me when I was feeling sad, and you cooked for me. I'm going to remember that for a very long time. Oh yeah, and because then you connect. And it's when you are in relationship, then things starts to shift. And so how do we build relationship? And let's start with honoring each other. All right, thank you.
If I may, just one question from the online audience, in what way the ideas that you shared today can inform and also influence different development policies?
Sure. Yeah, so it goes back to listening. A lot of us, again, we train in all these wonderful models, but we're stepping into a story. We're stepping into a community, and there's already a story there. And what is the story that was already there? You never start from, I'm coming to bring this or going to support. What's the story that was already there? And how do I honor that? And also So how do I honor what's already there? And maybe, am I bringing some stories? Am I bringing some preconceived notions about who these people are and what they should do and what will help them? What do I need to let go, of my story as I enter into this community? And again, like the example that I gave, and when I truly engage, am I willing to be transformed by it? Not just I'm here to help you and fix you and do this for you, but as we engage together, ask for permission, and then how can we transform together and what can we learn from each other?
Thank you. We have one last question from the online audience. It is, how can storytelling and narrative change particularly contribute to the transformation of development practices and promote more inclusive outcomes?
I think was that the same question?
I'm not sure, ma'am. I think this is particularly about how you tell the story.
Oh, how you tell the story.
The narrative, yeah.
Okay. Well, there's a lot of ways to tell stories, and I think, when we start talking about techniques, I think the most important thing is that it comes from your heart, right? That it comes from your heart, that you take your time, that you're present in it, that you also keep in mind who's my audience, right? Who's my audience? I'm not just talking, but I'm talking to touch you. I'm talking to connect with you. And part of it is just practice. Start sharing stories with each other, and you find some things will come easier than other things. And then there's also specific things as far as how do I use my voice. Like even when I was telling this story, at some point I stood up, and it's like, oh, wait a second, something's happening. So in terms of pausing, in terms of where do you lay the emphasis, but it's just technique stuff. You can look that up online. But you will find a way that will resonate with you. So that's what I said. So start telling stories, but find your way in a way that works for you.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you all for posing some thought-provoking questions. And thank you so much, Dr. Cairo, for patiently answering these questions.
You're welcome.
As this lecture comes to an end, we hope that you have all had an enriching experience. I now invite Professor Nidhi Piplani Kapoor, Head of Symbiosis Center for European Studies and advisor for the student think tank, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Joanna. On behalf of Symbiosis Center for European Studies, Symbiosis Center for International Education, Symbiosis International Deemed University, it is with immense pleasure and gratitude that I deliver the vote of thanks. We have had the extraordinary privilege of hosting the Kapuscinski Development Lecture in collaboration with the European Commission and United Nations Development Program for the very first time in India at Symbiosis, and we are very grateful for that opportunity. We would like to congratulate and express our gratitude to you, Dr. Aminata Cairo, for your book on holding spaces for the richness of our stories, and for taking us on this extraordinary journey of words, music, dance, and ceremony, the spiritual ceremony, so to say, that transported us back to the stories that form the backdrop of our current knowledge. You skillfully spread your vision, challenging conventional boundaries, drawing upon indigenous knowledge, the blues aesthetics, the holy hip-hop, the Caribbean, and the Black feminist theories. By sharing your personal stories, you skillfully led us on a transformative journey, aiming to collectively create a new narrative. Your book presentation is an unparalleled experience, and that will resonate with us for a lifetime. Once again, we express our gratitude and heartfelt appreciation to you, Aminata, for enlightening insights and captivating storytelling. Your contribution has left an indelible mark on us, inspiring us to embrace the power of diverse narratives and to strive for a more inclusive world. We would also like to extend our sincere appreciation to our organizers, the European Commission, Mr. Martin Seychelles and his team, and the United Nations Development Program, particularly Mr. Jan Szynski and his team, for their constant guidance. We are grateful for the continued support we also receive from the delegation of European Union to India, particularly Mr. Dr. Vivek Tham, for his thoughtfulness in considering us for these opportunities. To the students and faculty mentors present in the audience, we want to express our reverence for your active participation and enthusiasm through the lecture. Your engagement and thoughtful contributions have enhanced the intellectual atmosphere of this gathering, and we commend your dedication to expanding knowledge and perspectives. We would like to extend a special thank you to our online audience who joined us from different parts of the world through Zoom and who are watching us through the live streaming link. Your presence and engagement have transcended geographical boundaries, allowing us to share this transformative experience with a global community. We are grateful for your virtual presence and the enriching perspectives you brought into the discussions. We would also like to acknowledge and extend our heartfelt gratitude to the leadership of Symbiosis International Deemed University, Dr. Vidya Yeravdekar, the Pro-Chancellor, Dr. Rajni Gupte, the Vice-Chancellor, and Dr. Neeta Patankar, the Director of Symbiosis Center for International Education, who have been instrumental in fostering an environment of academic excellence, institutional collaboration, and cultural diversity. Their visionary leadership and unwavering support have paved the way for the success of today's event, which has been truly remarkable. No event of this magnitude can be successful without the tireless efforts of a dedicated organizing team. We would like to extend our earnest appreciation to Mr. Akshay Lahare from SES for his pivotal role in coordinating this entire event seamlessly, and I really appreciate that support that he has been extended to us. I would also like to thank Joanna Joshua, the president of the Symbiosis Student Think Tank, for her exceptional anchoring of the show. Additionally, we acknowledge the contributions of the interns from the Symbiosis Center for European Studies, whose hard work behind the scenes have made this a resounding success. We also express our appreciation to IT, communications and media, and logistics support teams who have coordinated to contribute to the success of the event. Together, we have enriched our understanding and stimulated further dialogue on the pursuit of inclusivity. Let us carry the lessons learned from this lecture today into our lives and strive to become more inclusive and a better person. Thank you once again for gracing this occasion with your presence. We now invite you all to proceed on the first floor to the kitchen, where we'll have a nice, delightful lunch, and we'll have more opportunity to engage with the speaker as well as the team from UNDP. Thank you once again.